So I don't know about all you guys, but I absolutely love the Dominion War, and I love all the ships and all the races fighting one another and finding what kind of ships they're using, what they're doing. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take the most common warship from the major galactic empires, being the Romulans, the Klingons, the Federation, the Cardassians, and the Dominion, and we're going to review their ships. We're going to look at their firepower, their shields, their hull, their specialty weapons like cloaking devices, things of that nature. We're going to be talking about their production. We're going to be talking about the warp speed, and we're going to do an analysis, and we're going to find out which was the best ship for frontline warfare. Alright, so first on our list is going to be the Romulan Warbird Dietrich's class. So this is the most common ship that was seen by the Romulan Star Empire during the Dominion Wars. It is by far the largest ship on this list. Next on our list is the Burrell. This is a bird of prey variant. This is a small variant. This is a very fast, nimble warship used by the Klingon Empire. The Klingon Task Force, this is probably one of their most common, and this is probably one of the most well-known ships in all of Star Trek, the Burrell. Next on our list is the Cardassian Union. This is the Cardassian warship. This is a small attack cruiser, which is known as the Galor, and it is known as a Galor Type 2. There are several variants, but we'll be using the Galor 2 for our analysis because it is the most common variant. Next on our list is the old and aging Excelsior. This is a Federation light starship. This light cruiser is one of the most common starships seen in the Federation. When it comes to actual combat roles, it is the most common combat ship of the Federation. Next on our list is the Dominion bug ship. This is the most common weapon used by the Dominion. It's the smallest ship on this list, but it's also one of the most advanced ships on this list. This is the primary weapon for the Jem'Hadar, who work for the Founders. Alright, so like I said, we're going to do analysis of all the ships. We're going to break them completely down. Without a doubt, we know that the Romulan Warbird is by far the strongest ship on this list. But besides the Romulan Warbird, who do you think is going to come on top? Alright, let's get our ships programmed in and let's take a look and let's start figuring out. So we'll start with the first section as we look at the Jem'Hadar fighter and we'll look at its firepower. Alright, so the Jem'Hadar has 3 polaron beam weapons. It also has an energy dampening weapon, which is a Bree weapon. It also has a photon torpedo, and it has a rear-facing turret. So this is a lot of weaponry, but what puts it so high is the fact that it's using the polaron beam technology. We have seen it fire 15 shots. That's around 975,000. If you know my previous calculations, this thing is hitting for the firepower ratios of a Galaxy-class starship. So for that reason, its volley and its weapon payload puts it very high in this list. Next, we'll take a look at the bird of prey. Alright, so next on the list is the bird of prey, and it's going to get a 5. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, it's only got 2 disruptors and 1 photon torpedo tube. Why is it at a 5? And it's pretty high for a ship of this caliber with such little weaponry. Well, the reason for that is Klingon disruptors, they can be set for different power outputs, going from 32,500 all the way up to 86,000. And the reason for that is their barrage that they're shooting from those disruptors is going to be equivalent to 520,000 terawatts. So we've seen them take out Jem'Hadar ships, no problem. We've seen them take it out with ratios of 16, 14, and 6. The reason for this is they just have such powerful weapons. So their weapon caliber is between a Galaxy-class phasers and then obviously Federation Type 9. They're superior than Type 9 phasers. So these are really powerful weapons for a small ship, just like the Jem'Hadar. They're not quite at that level, but they're about half. So after its full barrage, you're getting about half the destructive power than a full barrage from a Galaxy class from this little tiny ship. So it deserves that 5 category. All right, so next on the list is the Galor. The Galor has one spiral wave disruptor cannon, and it has 8 spiral wave disruptors. Now, the spiral wave disruptor cannon is a weapon that is modern. It's at the same level of a Federation Galaxy class. It can't fire as many for a barrage, so you're getting about 12 shots, which is like 780,000. So I gave it a 6. It's definitely going to be able to outgun a single bird of prey. Now, its secondary weapons is obviously the spiral wave disruptors. They're pretty low caliber. They could shoot about 13 shots, is what we've seen on screen. It's around 97,500. It's not particularly very impressive. It's better than nothing, but I mean, obviously, if the ship loses its primary weapon, its offensive capabilities go way down. But the fact that it is there and you do have to take it down, and it does have, good firing speed and very powerful weapons. So it's going to get a 6 in this category just because of the power that's behind the spiral wave disruptor cannon. Now, the ship could or could not have different weapons. It could have a torpedo launcher as well as missiles and other weapons, but we don't really ever see those weapons, and they're not very common. So I would say a 6 is pretty equivalent. That yes, it does have a very powerful weapon. It does have torpedoes, and then it has an okay amount of secondary weaponry. Now the next one is obviously the Excelsior. I'm putting it at a 7. And I know that seems pretty high on this list. It's right underneath the Jem'Hadar. But the reason for that is it's not really it has Type 9 phasers, and it's got about 20 of them. Anywhere between 10 to 20 phaser emitters. And those are lower grade weaponry, but at Type 9, they're around 20,000 or so. So it's decent firepower. It's not the greatest, but it's not that far behind. And then the ship is equipped with 4 photon torpedoes. Now, it could be 2, it could be 3, and it could be 4. Most variants are carrying around 4 torpedoes, and a lot of these ships are using Type 9 phasers, and they have, like I said, anywhere between 10 to 20. I would say 20 is probably more accurate, because when you see on screen, a lot of times there's a miscommunication with the way they count them, and they count the dual emitters as 1, and that's not correct. So if you have a dual emitter, you obviously have 2. This ship has around 20 dual emitters. 16 to 20 is probably the average. So it means that this ship, if it loses some of its emitters, it doesn't matter. It can still stay and fight. A lot of these other ships, they lose their primary weapons and they're done for. All right, so obviously next on the list, and everyone knows that the Warbird is going to be a 10. Not only does it have photon torpedo tube that are multi-shot, can shoot up to 6. It can shoot standard torpedoes. It can shoot plasma torpedoes. It has disruptors all throughout the ship. These disruptors are hitting for incredibly obscene amount of power, and they are probably one of the most powerful standard weapons aboard any ship of the major empires. And when I say standard, I mean we know that the Klingons have a heavy disruptor cannon on like the Vorcha class cruiser and things of that nature. It'll typically have 1. That's a really high powerful weapon. This thing's about half that power, and the ship is just bristling with them. Now, there are no official stats about how many disruptors there are on the Warbird. So, for an example, I have a Romulan Warbird model. There are several more disruptors points that are on there than what is typically said. Typically, it's said that you have 6 disruptors. And obviously, this thing has 2 torpedo launchers. But even if that is the case, it's still going to be a level 10 because each disruptor is around 175,500. So they are like basically 3 times the power output of a Federation Galaxy class Type 10 phaser. Now, we've seen them shoot between 12 to 18 times. Now, when we see the ship fire 18 times, it's trying to shoot a Romulan scout, so it was probably firing at a lower level, but we've also seen it take down a Galaxy-class shields. 80% of a Galaxy-class shield's down with 8 shots. This is canon. We know that Picard said this ship could destroy the Enterprise. We know more than one captain of a Romulan warbird had said that they could destroy the Enterprise. So we know that this ship is a warship without a doubt and is one of the most powerful ships of the Alpha Quadrant or Beta Quadrant powers. It's absolutely a beast. Its weapons are incredibly powerful. Now, the other thing about its weapon output being so high is because it's not using standard weapons. It's using these Romulan disruptors that are connected to a singularity device. So they're able to hit much higher levels of energy than other ships because basically they're using a small black hole. All right, so the next thing is we're going to talk about shields. Now, I know people talk about the Jem'Hadar fighter is a tough little ship, and it is. Its shields are garbage. They're around 325,000. Give you guys an idea, it's the amount of damage that a Miranda would have taken during Kirk's era. It's like their shield is garbage. It's like 100 years old. Now, it's not a terrible shield. I mean, I'm just saying, but for something of its size, the shield is decent. And so it's only a 2. Now, we're going to talk about the Bird of Prey. And it too, shields are about the same. Now, the Borels are an older ship. Their shields are around 325,000. So they're basically the same. There are some variants that are higher than that, but for the most part, they're not very impressive. These ships drop out pretty quickly. They can't take very much. They're very small, and that's it. Bird of Prey shields are kind of crappy. All right, so next on the list is the Galar. And I don't know if this is going to surprise you or not, but Galar shields are absolute garbage. So the Galar Type 2 shields, we've seen them go down after 4 shots from a Galaxy class Type X phaser. So it's like 260,000. That's even less than the Jem'Hadar and the Bird of Prey. Now, that's because shield technology, it's probably a shield generator that is built for a smaller ship. And because they're spreading it out, it's just getting weaker. It's a really strange thing to me that the Cardassians have such terrible shielding, because we see them later on with, the variant, the Kelton class, and that thing has got shields that are even stronger than the Enterprise, Enterprise D. So I don't really have an explanation. I don't really understand why their shields are so bad. The only thing I can think of is the Type 3 variant has these really, really powerful New Age shields, and that these are basically this cannon fodder. That's all I can say. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the Excelsior shielding. So the Excelsior shielding is much better than any of these ships so far on here, but it's not extreme. It's just better. So it's in the 480,000 to 520 terawatt range. So that's a lot better than the ships that we see here, but it's not amazing. So the shields are good for an Excelsior class, but they're not fantastic. All right, so the Romulan warbird is obviously going to get a 10 in this category again. Its shields are 1,560,000. They're not as good as a Galaxy class, but they're not that far off. So this is a magnificently powerful shield. It's very good. It's a new generation shield. It's definitely built for combat. So 10 all the way around. Now, for a ship of its size, the Jem'Hadar's hull is actually pretty tough. It's around 195,000. That's pretty impressive for a ship that is so incredibly small. So it will get a level 2. Now, next on the list is the Bird of Prey. It's also going to get a 2. It's got about the same hull value as what you see with the Jem'Hadar. It's a bigger ship, but its hull value is still not very impressive. And it's not really that much bigger. These are very small ships, and 195,000 for ships of its size is honestly pretty good. All right, so the next one is the Galor, and the Galor is going to hit pretty high in this category. So it's going to get a 6. And the reason it's getting a 6 is because the hull value is 1,235,000. So its hull value is up there with that of a Galaxy-class starship. Now, the reason why this is so impressive is because its mass is 1,678,000. So structural integrity fields are really, really strong, or they have some kind of alloy, or they're doing something that's making it light and very strong. I don't know which is the latter, which one's the correct one. I have been told by some of you guys that it's the lateral, and it's the structural integrity fields are really strong with the Cardassians. I'm going to go ahead and go with it, and from what I've seen stuff that backs that up. So we're getting a 6. All right, so the Excelsior is only going to get a 4. So I've gotten some new data, and the actual hull strength of the Excelsior is 649,548, and that's coming directly from one of the data table manuals about the ship, its mass, and all that stuff. So my previous guess was like 880. It is off. So it would have had a 5, but with this new data, it's falling down to a 4. I mean, for a ship of that era, it's falling behind a standard ship. It's not very impressive. So it's only going to get a 4. All right, and so obviously the Warbird is going to get a 10 on this list again. Its hull value, we know for sure it's able to take 33 shots from a Jem'Hadar fighter. We know that's 2,145,000. It's double that even of a Galaxy-class starship. So compared to everything on this list, it's going way beyond anything we see here. It's 10 out of 10 on this list. Its mass is 4,500,000 metric tons. So it has the same mass of the Galaxy-class starship and twice the hit points. All right, so this is a category I'm calling special. I was watching Vidum Geek Media 98, and I saw them use this on one of their categories, and it made a lot of sense to me, so I went ahead and borrowed it. And so the Jem'Hadar fighter, I'm going to give it a 5. And the reason I'm going to give it a 5 is, number one, it can beam through your shields, so it could transport people through your shields. Number two, its weapons can fire through your shields. And the other thing it can do is it can use that Bree energy weapon, which I would give it a 3. The ship has got a lot of automation, so it doesn't take hardly any crew to run this thing, so that's 4 points. And then 5 points is because its scanners are incredibly good. And they're strong enough that they can even detect cloaked vessels. So that is a lot of specialty equipment and a lot of really advanced stuff in a little tiny ship. And that makes sense because we know, obviously, the Jem'Hadar, the founders, are more advanced than even the Federation. All right, and next we're going to do the Bird of Prey. And I know you guys are probably thinking you should only get 1 for the cloaking device. But no, it's going to get 2 points. And the reason for that is this ship can operate with 12 people. So there can be up to just 12 people to operate this ship. So that means a Bird of Prey has a lot of automation, just like the Jem'Hadar fighter. And that is obviously technology. There's going into that, making it automated, making it easy for 12 people to run a starship is pretty impressive. Okay. So next is the Galor, and this is going to surprise you guys that it's getting 4 in this category. So number one, the ship's big. It can carry troops. So that adds to its specialty. Spiral wave disruptors can shoot further than phasers. So they get further distance range using that technology than Federation ships. So that gives it a specialty point there. On top of that, the ship's armor or structural integrity fields are better than Starfleet or any of the other races really in here. And for the mass to the ratio to the hull value is very high. And there's some kind of technology behind there that's doing that. And then the last part is more of the way the ship is built. So Galor 1, 2, 3s, and there's even Galor's 4s out there. They're all using the exact same blueprint. And even the Kelton class is a Galor with some components on it because of the the ability to create this ship incredibly fast, faster than any other ship of its size, because of the Cardassians' way of doing things and using this exact same blueprint. It's getting an additional point because not only can they build these ships super fast, they also make everything built because of the standardization. You can repair these ships and get them back into the battlefield very, very quickly. And so that's why it's getting an additional part, is because it is honestly the jack of all trades for the Cardassian Union. Next on our list is 2 points, and that's the Federation Excelsior. So the Excelsior is a really old ship. It's getting 2 points because, number one, it can carry troops just like the Galor. It's a decent-sized ship. And then, number two, it's a gunboat. So not only does this ship have okay weapons, it's got a lot of them. Like I said, 16 to 20, 4 torpedoes. That is a lot of weaponry and a lot of, the ability to back up and stay in a fight. And I'm adding that to the specialty category because all these other ships don't have anywhere near the amount of firepower per module that this ship has. And besides that, there's really nothing special. Like, there are a lot of these ships in the Federation, and they're produced at a large number, but it's nothing like the Galor, where it's like the main ship and the blueprint that everyone uses or anything like that. So I'm not giving any other points to that. It's just a ship that's been built for a very, very long time, so there's so many of them. Okay, so now it's the Warbird. Now the Warbird is getting 5. Number one, it's got a cloaking device. It can carry a large amount of troops. It can also carry other starships within inside its hull. So it's also a carrier on top of everything else. It has the singularity device that it uses to power its warp engines and its weapons. Is a unique technology that only the Romulans have. It allows the Romulan Warbird to operate basically for an unlimited amount of time. It's kind of like when you compare like World War II carriers to modern carriers of the United States. When you have a nuclear engine, there's no need to come back until you need supplies. Other carriers back in the day using gas fuel, they could go for a few days and come back. The same thing is happening with Federation starships. They can go out for a couple of years, 4 or 5 years. They got to come back and refuel. The Warbird doesn't have to do that. Basically the Warbird can just stay wherever it's at for as long as it wants. As long as nothing happens to the singularity device, it can honestly stay there forever. Okay, and the last part is also because of the singularity device. They can charge weapons that are beyond normal levels. So Federation, top-of-the-line weaponry, 65,000. The Romulan Warbird, 175,500. We talked about this with its weapons. It's able to outpower its weapon systems on an average scale more so than any other ship. And so because of that singularity device and its ability to do that, it gives it a unique ability to decloak and attack you with unbelievable amounts of firepower quickly and then get away. It's like a souped up version of the bird of prey. So another thing to think about that, besides the offensive capabilities, you can think about like the defensive capabilities. You could be watching your enemy and you don't ever have to go back home. You can just stay there watching them for years upon years. It's such a huge advantage. I honestly thought about giving it an additional point, but I decided not to, because really we already know what it's doing. It is the singular device, the power. I think 5 is pretty reasonable. There might be some additional technology with the Warbird that I'm not familiar with. And if you guys do know that maybe it should be a 6 or maybe a 7. But as far as I can tell, those are the only real major things that are unique about the ship that would put it in that category of 5 specialty abilities. All right, so the Jem'Hadar fighter can go warp 9.5, which is pretty much the standard of most starships. So it's going to get a 5. So the Klingon bird of prey is going to get a 4. It's like warp 9 or 9.2. It's only slightly slower than the 9.5 of the Jem'Hadar. And we know that because during the Deep Space Nine episode, we know that the Jem'Hadar were going to overtake the Klingon fleet. Remember when that took place? So we know that they're slightly faster, but it's not like a giant leap or anything. Now, this is kind of taking them into consideration, combat situation. Now, warp speeds for the Galor, from what I've seen, are slightly slower than some of the other ships. So I'm giving it a 4. But what I do look at for the most part, and what manuals say, is they're capable of going warp 9. Now, that's like pushing it to the absolute limit, but when you're in a combat situation, they can go warp 9. I don't see why they can't. Most ships are going warp 9. That's really common during this time period. Cardassians are known for trading and getting technology and stealing, so I find it unlikely that they don't have modern warp technology. I know some people have kind of said that, but from what I've seen in my research and the manuals and everything, I don't really see that. I do see them having slower standard warp speeds, but when you're in a combat situation, you're getting there as fast as you can, and you're going to do the 12-hour burn, and that's what most of these ships are doing. So I'm really going for like the max speed, and that's kind of like what I'm determining. And so it's a 4. Now, this next one might be a little controversial because it's the Excelsior, and I'm saying it can go warp. I've seen it warp 9 to warp 9.3 to warp 9.6. So basically what we've seen is the Excelsiors, they don't really make Excelsiors with obsolete engines. They've all been upgraded. So every ship you're seeing is going to have a standard warp speed of at least 9.5. So the Excelsiors got modern Federation technology. It's equivalent with speed to the Jem'Hadar. We've actually seen Federation ships outrun Jem'Hadar, but this ship is an older ship, and it's not a Galaxy. It's not some of the newer generation, but it's at least the same, or it's at par pretty much with the Jem'Hadar fighter. So it's just a 5. So the Romulan Warbird is just standard warp speeds. It's not super slow. It's not super fast. It can't compete with the Galaxy class or any modern Federation starships. They're in a whole new category. So I really don't think that this ship is particularly super fast. It's just average, which makes sense because not only is this ship, Romulan technology is said to be a little slower than Federation's. We've seen data talk about this. We've seen this on screen, but the ship is absolutely massive. The bigger you are, the slower you're going to move in warp. You need giant engines to move that thing. So warp 9 for a ship of this size is a moderate speed. And so I don't think it's going to overtake any ship on this list. I think it would stay with the Jem'Hadar and the older Federation starships. Not very impressive, just standard. All right, so this next category I want to explain a little bit before you see my ratios. So I'm talking about the cost value. It's not like, okay, it's 10 because it's the most expensive. It's actually how much you can build. So I guess cost is really the best. It should have been like amount or number, basically. Repairing, all these factors are all thrown in together to give ratios. So the cost value of a Jem'Hadar fighter is next to nothing. They are built in insane amounts of numbers, and so they're getting a straight up 10. Now, the Burrell is built. There are a lot of Burrells built. They're a really common ship. They're all throughout, every task force has Burrells with them. They're like the go-to ship for the Klingon Empire, but the Klingon Empire still has lots of different ships. They have the Vorcha class cruiser. They have the Nigvar. They have different variants of the bird of prey. They have the K-Vort, and you have Katangas. And so there's a variety of different Klingon ships. And yes, it's a lot. They're cheap. They're easy to build, easy to maintain. There's a lot of them. It's a 7. So I'm going to give the Galor a 5. Now we know the Cardassians have built a lot of these ships, but they've been building these ships for a very, very long time. And the Cardassian military is weaker than the Klingons. Obviously, we know that for a fact. So the number of these ships is very high, and it is a cruiser, so it's relatively large. But they can mass produce these things, and so I'm going to give it a 5 because yes, overall there are so many Galors on the battlefield, but there are more birds of prey and there are more Dominion fighters. But there's just, for a ship of that size, there is a shit ton of them. So that's why I'm giving it a 5. It's mostly because how I talked about how there's that unified construction module, the Galor body. It allowed the Cardassians to build these ships en masse, and that's the whole reason why the Galor is there. It also, looks like their symbol, and it's like kind of like a cultural thing for the Cardassians. All right, so I put cost of 4 for the Excelsior because the Federation are really good about building large ships like the Galaxy, the Akiras, and things of that nature. And so they don't really have a hard time at all with building smaller ships. I mean, honestly, the Excelsior is like a low to mid-tier size starship at this point during the Dominion War. And so there is a lot of them, and they are able to build them in mass. The design is very easy. They have it down. There's a lot of them. There's not as many as them as obviously the Galors, but it's not that far off because the Federation is 2 or 3 times larger than the Cardassians, and so the ratio between the two isn't that far off, and so that's why I'm giving it a 4, is because there are a lot of these ships, and they're not very hard to make. Now, I know this is going to be kind of controversial because I know what you're thinking. It should be an absolute 1 because the ship is absolutely stupidly large and it's got to take a lot of resources in order to build this thing. And you are absolutely 100% right, except for one thing I want you to think about. What did the Romulan Empire do? They put all their eggs in one basket. You don't ever see any other ship fighting on screen besides the Warbird. They don't bring anything else. And the reason for that is because they built a lot of these ships. And they built, honestly, we know this because of what had happened with Picard, that they built nothing but these giant, huge ships during the Dominion War. They were building Warbirds, and they lost just about all of them, and all their ship facilities were designed for building these giant ships. And they didn't have the infrastructure, they didn't have the economics after the war. They were devastated. The Romulan Empire basically collapsed on itself, and they started building small ships again, or medium to small ships is what you see later on. So, because their entire infrastructure was built to build these juggernauts, I'm giving them a 3. Because, yeah, they definitely had the smallest force, but they still had hundreds of these ships. And to build hundreds of these ships, you would have a massive amount of your infrastructure building them. So they were building them pretty quickly for ships of those sizes, and they were impressive, the amount of ships that they were able to donate to the war, and they were all Warbirds. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's add up, and I'll be honest with you, the Jem'Hadar fighter at 32, it's pretty impressive. It hit a lot of high marks, more than I was expecting it to, honestly, when I was kind of think about it. Like, I know the Jem'Hadar's got a lot of firepower, everything else is kind of garbage. But then, obviously it's a pretty fast ship. They can build a lot of it. It's actually really impressive and a really powerful warship. Now, like I said, if you watch my video about the Klingon, you should be surprised about this. The Bird of Prey was an effective warship. It's only getting 22 points. We know that these ships did not hold up very well, and after the Dominion War, the Burrell basically was decommissioned, and larger, more powerful ships are being built. So this ship is not as effective as it used to be, and it took a huge, huge pounding during the Dominion War. All right, so the Galor has got 26 points. It's a bigger ship. It should be above the Burrell. It's not really that far above it. It is, decent amount of points above it. It's not really a particularly great ship. I mean, it's got decent firepower, no shielding. Its hull value is good. It's got some specialties to it. Its warp is not even at standards. It's honestly not that great of a ship. It was just something the Cardassians built because the Cardassians' technology is not as good as some of the other empires. So it's an okay ship. Now, the Excelsior, I'm going to say the exact opposite. It's 25 points. It's falling. It's better than Burrell. It's just right there with, obviously, the Galor. This ship is very old. I'm going to give it high marks. I really didn't know where it was going to fall, but I like the fact it was really close to Galor, and there's kind of the idea that they're, you know, around the same, and it did kind of come out what I expected. So the Excelsior is a defective ship. It's a really old ship, and the level of 25 I think is respectable for something so old. Okay, so I don't know if anything stood out for you or surprised you. I mean, they were all pretty much what I was expecting. I mean, I knew the Romulan Warbird was going to hit, obviously, really high levels, being as big and how much firepower it has. And at 43, you know, it's pretty impressive. It definitely dominates anything on this list. You know, it's the most common ship the Romulan Empire has. So we look at this, it kind of really shows you that. I mean, you think about this as I don't know, the cost is like fleets, you know. You could only have 3 fleets of 43. Let's just kind of like say that, right? And then you have 10 of 32. It shows you that, wow, that is super impressive. Very, very impressive what the Jem'Hadar are doing. That is a really, really strong-ass ship. And you're just absolutely bringing the pain with that thing. It's a super versatile starship. These other ships are low tier, in my opinion. The Excelsior, the Galor, you know, when it goes to the actual combat, they're just kind of cannon fire, honestly. And the Warbird is obviously, you know, that's the best of the best. So if you were to kind of look at fleet logistics, you know, like talk about what their powers are, this is kind of like what it would look like based on those ratios. So the Romulan fleet power is 129. The Klingon, 154, Federation is 100, Cardassian is 130, and the Jem'Hadar 320. So you can see that between the powers, obviously the Federation's old ship is falling behind. Then there's the Galor, which is a newer ship, 30 points above that, but it's tied with the Warbird. So the Warbird fleet and the Galor fleet are actually pretty similar in power. And then when you look at the Klingon fleet, would be 154, you know, points with ships. You know, that's way stronger than the Romulans and obviously somebody else. But then they get dwarfed by the Dominion. It's kind of interesting, like how the logistics work out. And you can see, like, you know, obviously there's more to a ship than just pure shields and pure firepower. Like you have other factors to take in, you know, consideration with your fleet logistics. And I think this is a pretty cool thing. I really liked this video. I thought it was really fun. If you guys like this kind of videos, you know, leave me a comment, give me a like, and then I'll create more videos and talk more stats and do this kind of breakdown of different ships, maybe capital ships, you know, maybe just cruisers, or just generalize it instead of just the most common ship. Tell me what you think.